How you feeling?
I'm good, man. How are you? Happy Thanksgiving.
Happy Thanksgiving. You were just regaling us with all your cooking, bro. I didn't know
Bro,
you were such a chef. Let's go.
first of all, I love cooking. I love to cook. Real Betty Crocker over here. I should use like a better reference, but um I love to cook, but I feel like I don't know, maybe we didn't hang like that, but I used to cook all the time in DC and throw dinner parties all the time when I lived in DC. And so I'm a big fan of a dinner party. I'm a big fan of cooking for a crowd, mostly because of the praise I then get for my cooking, which is why I do it. But no, I mean, I love to cook, but this was a bit much. I've literally been cooking for 3 days. Like I cooked a turkey, a 6 pound tenderloin,
Whoa.
squash, green beans, mashed potatoes, cheesy potatoes. No, my aunt did the cheesy potatoes. I did mac and cheese, like creamy baked mac and cheese, an apple pie. Like I did, there was a lot
Bro.
happening. There's a lot happening. French onion soup, all of it from
Unbelievable.
scratch. And
All and so you were just in the kitchen
for literally 2.5 days.
all week.
And no
Incredible.
one, like my sister had a bunch of stuff. We did it at my sister's house. So she had a bunch of stuff to like get ready to host. But
Yeah.
like my parents were long gone. Like I don't know what they were doing. My mom literally said to me on morning of Christmas, morning of Thanksgiving, I come over to her house and she's like hanging she's like on the couch. All my family lived in one building, and so we just like slutter between all the buildings. And I went into her house and like, how you doing? Like just chilling hard, reading magazines on the couch. And she's like, honey, I read an article that said it's not polite to be in the kitchen when someone else is cooking. So I'm giving you distance. Like, woman.
I mean, it's
Not
not
that she's not a good cook anyway. So
you were
I
looking for
wouldn't have
some
wanted her in the
assistance.
kitchen. Yeah, I wouldn't have wanted her in the kitchen no matter what. But so
Incredible.
it was just sort of like that thing when you've been just laboring for days and everyone around you is just chilling. But it was fun.
Yeah. Some resentment starts to grow a little bit. Just a little bit.
Tiny
A
bit.
little bit.
Tiny bit of
Um,
resistance. Yeah, resentment. But it was so fun. It was so fun. And I have the best family. So we were hanging pretty hard last night. It was a good time.
love it. I love it. So being in Ohio, how much of were you able to escape the political conversations during Thanksgiving? Like how much of because that's always the challenge, especially this year, you know?
Yeah, but don't forget, like this side of my family, my Ohio side, my mom's side is very waspy, right? So the white
Okay.
side, they're very Protestant, sort of, not in a religious way, but sort of in the you don't talk about politics, religion, or money
Right,
very
right,
openly. And so multiple, like some of my family is quite are Republicans. Most of them, not almost, I don't think anyone voted for Trump. So it's like not a thing, but they are Republicans. But a couple of my cousins were like, that was bad. You okay? Like in
yeah.
literally whispering, like pulling me aside, like, wish we were doing, like, when are you in DC next? Would have
Oh,
been better if it went the other way, wouldn't it? And it was just like, guys, we can talk openly. So like
yeah.
my black side is all from the Caribbean. Thanksgiving's not a thing. Like my dad thinks Thanksgiving
Yeah.
is so weird still. It's like he's been doing Thanksgiving for 40 years and he's just like, what is this? Like this is such a weird holiday. This is kind of foul. Like, what is this? Turkey is dry. Like, what is happening? So so yeah, I was able to escape it because it just doesn't really pop off like that at Shea
Yeah.
Twig. What about you?
That sounds right. That sounds right. I think we tried our best to stay away from it. I think it's just too raw right now. Um, and so we did our best to focus on like children, like our kids. my sister-in-law, my brother-in-law's kids, and it was good. It was good. It was good to take a pause. We were reading a lot of, and this year was so interesting on all the social media. There was a lot of advice on how to engage with family members that have opposing political views. And so I was literally like reading them aloud to prepare my family because we are going to see my family tomorrow in New Jersey, and so there were some do's and don'ts, and I think that
Talk me
you know,
through. Like, yeah, I never have to
according,
worry about this because my white family just like does not talk about anything. Like,
well, yeah, I mean, according to the Associated Press, they had a Instagram carousel that was like ten slides deep. There were do's and don'ts. A lot of the do's were about boundary setting. A lot of the do's were my favorite do. The first one was do ask yourself, do you want to really put yourself in this position? So it was like, do we really want to go to New Jersey and see my folks? Um, you know,
tricky.
yeah, don't take the bait was one, which I think is good, right? I think a lot of times one can find oneself in a situation where a family member wants to kind of
Get
rile
into
you
it.
up, want to,
Yeah.
just watched a hot off the presses Fox News diatribe and wants to go in. Um, but it was, I think that tomorrow will be great. It's a very short trip, so I think that we will hopefully escape any personal attacks because I think that that's the piece, right? Is for peeps um, that don't know, like, my wife is the executive director of one of the Democratic committees, the Democratic redistricting committee. So it's her job. This is literally her job. So, and that's usually like the first line of questioning when you see family. It's like, how's work? Like,
Totally.
or how's your year going? So, it becomes really hard to unpack everything that's already sort of taking place. We have anecdotes and stories of friends who jobs have been career government job offers that were um, accepted and offered months ago that were rescinded because of the incoming administration, and also friends and colleagues in different departments and agencies that are career staff who are effectively like ready to be fired. So the DC is going to go through. I think everyone is sort of girding themselves for what. There's always a transition every 4 years. There's always a new administration that comes in if it's not a reelection year. We've gone through it before with Trump, and there were a lot of changes, but I think this one will be acutely felt. This one will be very different than some of the years past. So, um, yeah. So I just ate a lot of food, Twig. That's pretty much was my gambit. I just ate. I ate a lot. I
Yeah.
ate my feelings.
Hmm.
Um, but we got to get into it. There's been so much. I was thinking, walking over from the ice skating rink, which is where we are just at. Like, it's almost hard to pick what we could cover. I actually want to know what you are interested in getting into. Oh no, it's knocked over my phone. Because you and I talked about how you do not like consuming political media, right? And yet we're in
I
this moment. We're in this
I
moment.
would say this. I would say
Okay.
I am judicious about what political media I consume. Like
Got it.
I'm not a scroller, like I'm not a doom scroller. I
Right.
don't watch Fox to know what the other side is up to. Like I don't I have boundary I'm very boundaried about my political content, but political content that I like and that makes me think and that generally like genuinely is offering something distinct and timely and new. I love.
Yes.
I just don't like watch repetitive shit or people who like haven't actually done anything in the field they're talking about. They're just sort of wildly speculating or opining. Like, I don't need any of that. But I took one for the team this week. I did one for you.
You did. This is really exciting because usually I am the one giving you the rundown, right, around what people are talking about. But because I've been with family all week, I just haven't had a chance to dive in at all. And so
Yeah.
it's you. It was your turn. I want
And
to
as I
hear.
mentioned, being abandoned by my family while I cooked dinner, I for 2.5 days,
Oh Lord.
I had a lot of time to listen to podcasts. So I listened to the Pod Save America podcast featuring David Plouffe, Stephanie Cutter, Jen O'Malley Dillon, and Quentin Fulks. That has lit up the I don't know, not the what's our version of a manosphere that has lit up the libosphere. Um,
It's lit up both the libosphere and the right wingosphere too.
has it?
Because yeah,
Are they unified?
because you can just imagine there's a little bit of just what's the term? It's like rubbernecking, like when you see an accident and you just can't look away, even if even if you don't have any family members or anyone who's associated with the accident, like you want to just look, you want to see, you want to dissect.
Yeah.
And so no, I mean it lit up everywhere, everywhere, everywhere. And I just want to hear from you. Tell me about it. Like, first off, why
Okay.
were there so many of them on this pod? Did they need all of them? Did they need did they need Fluff Cutter, Jen, and Quentin on this pod? My first
Well,
question.
if they hadn't, it would have been a white people parade, to be perfectly candid. Like, if they hadn't had
Oh,
Quentin, Quentin is the least known entity on that outside of political circles.
why wasn't
It
Julie
would
on?
just been of, but then it just would have been four white people talking about again, talking about which like again anyway. So it was so yes, I think you needed that many. Obviously,
Okay.
you had to have Pluff and Jen. I don't know that you had to have Cutter. Maybe she wanted to do it. Maybe Cutter was the person who was like the closest with Dan or whoever was doing the interview. I have no idea. Um, it was interesting. Okay, so I'll give you some top lines
Okay.
first.
Okay.
And here's the thing. Nothing they said in the course of this hour and 45-minute long interview I found to be unreasonable or even wrong. But they kept it so narrowly contained to the last 100 days. And so if you only judge what happened and their decision-making process for the last 107 days, then I think the case they laid out on this podcast is right. But if you are like basically anyone who exists in time, or at least this time space continuum, and know that the general election started over a year ago, and that at least Quentin Fulks and Jen O'Malley Dillon, not Stephanie Cutter and David Plouffe, but at least those two who were on this podcast were on the staff that entire time and made a bunch of decisions that had massive implications for what happened over those 107 days, then what they were saying was kind of bullshit. You know, you're sort of just like, guys, like this is such a, like, this is a little bit of razzle dazzle for like an excuse making and sort of myth making of what was possible. So that was sort of the number one thing that I think stood out when you listen to it. Was sort of like JD Vance at the VP debate. It was like, you're making this all sound really reasonable, but if you dig a little bit deeper, it starts to fall apart sort of immediately. And so again, nothing they said was like wrong, but it just wasn't in the right. It was in such a specific and sort of biased context that favored what they were saying. And that I'm not surprised at all that the people who listen to it so far, the other people who listen to it so far, are just like, there's zero accountability here. Like there's very little sort of self-awareness or willingness to be like, hey, we made the wrong call, which I think is a massive problem. So I think that's one thing. One of the other things that really jumped out to me is Dan Pfeiffer asked them a question about misuse of campaign funds, specifically around the Call Her Daddy set and the Sphere. And Jen O'Malley Dillon's answer was that it was always really important to them that they interact with culture and that they leverage and spend money on culture in order to have a campaign that made it feel like you were joining something bigger than just making it bigger than just one person.
Sure.
Call Her Daddy, sure. Lighting up the Sphere is not participating in culture. Like that is not what culture is. She's like, we spent money on murals and billboards. It was just like, you don't understand what culture is. If you think that that is like that two-dimensional exchange is how you interact with culture. So that was a really telling thing, and something that I know that we've talked a lot about, is like how our candidates, our campaigns, and the party overall needs to understand what culture actually is and how you interact with it and how you leverage it in order to tell the story that you're trying to tell in the way that Donald Trump does, so sort of instinctively and intuitively. And then the third thing that I thought one of the third things that jumped out to me that I thought you would find really interesting is in the kind of conversation around whether or not she should have gone on Rogan. Cutter was like, she wanted to go. Kamala Harris would have done anything, would have talked to anybody, but we couldn't make it happen from a scheduling standpoint. Fine, what have you. They were trying to do it when she went to Houston for Beyonce, and that was the day that he was interviewing Trump. Fine, what have you. That they did a Club Shay Shay, they did all sorts of things. They tried to get her on Hot Ones, and apparently a bunch of people said no. So a bunch of people said they didn't want to get into politics. And so they didn't have her on, and they didn't have Trump on. And here's
a bunch of people at Hot Ones.
Like Hot Ones and other sort of like YouTube centric.
Okay. Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
Sure. Which is, of course, and like you can anticipate that, and that makes total sense. But it also goes back to what we're saying around culture, which is this needs to be 365. Like this needs to be a way that you govern as well as a way that you campaign. And like Kamala Harris could have gone on Hot Ones anytime she wanted last year.
Yeah.
Right? She could go, like she should have done that ages ago.
Yeah.
She still does do it. So it's one of those, like, how we get our candidates out and into more spaces and understanding that it's not just, a September or October phone call to make, but that it is something that you like sort of digging the well before you're thirsty. And then everything else was sort of platitudes, right? Like Dan asked them about the trans ad, and they all sort of dismissed it. But it was very telling. That's probably the longest answer they gave. All four of them spoke. All four, like, let me add my two pieces about why we didn't respond to that, why it wasn't effective, why we didn't see voters, we don't think anyone, blah, 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 blah. I thought Quentin had the most like intelligible answer on that, in that he said that wasn't just about trans rights. It was also about the economy. It was also about her being out of touch. But it was clearly something that they were pretty defensive about. But again, none of them were like, we made a mistake, we should have put something up. I mean,
interesting.
It was sort of like if anything, I think people are just still really angry. And I think it's not surprising that they are not trying to hear from these people, especially if there's no contrition whatsoever coming from these four, which there was none. And it's also just sort of like they maybe need to move on and do other things for a couple cycles.
Yeah, I think I guess that was the thing that surprised me the most on the decision to do it, right?
Oh, there's one more thing I want to tell you about, but go ahead.
Yeah, go.
Well, the one thing that they said that was really smart was that the right does such a better job around coordinating their super PACs, and that Democrats are way more cautious and sort of follow the spirit versus the letter of the law.
Sure.
And that we need to stop doing this thing where we run all the outside money through one organization and spread the wealth a little bit and then allow them to coordinate, which I thought made a lot of sense.
I think that makes a lot of sense. That's one of the things I want to touch on in terms of, I think we maybe touch on it a little bit on our last pod. I can't even remember because I think I blacked out halfway through the last pod episode. But just like how we are organizing the outside game and the Democratic Party itself, right? How those two things, never the twain shall meet, and never, honestly, it's almost in some cases at opposing ends or opposing aims. And when we talk about the Democratic Party, we include the presidential in that, obviously. I have so many questions I mean, maybe I should just watch the interview and
I
then
don't
dig
think
into it.
Yeah, I don't think
you don't think I'll find it as provocative as people have made it out to be, it sounds like.
No.
Okay. Well, the one I won't, someone who will not be named, who Twigg and I respect more than anything, and someone who is not typically moved to emotion, sent you and I a very angry text.
I've gotten so many texts about this interview.
Yeah. Well, this is the piece I did. I am curious what you think, which is, it sounds like they touch a little bit on the spending, but they talk a lot about the sort of ad testing. Like they kept saying, according to this friend who texted us, you know, we tested all of our ads, and so therefore everything that we did, according to the people that we paid millions and millions of dollars to tell us that our ads are great, they're telling us that we had the right messaging. What was their response to how badly we lost on key issues as it relates to the Democratic base? Like, did they just chalk it up to it's a bad year and it has nothing to do with the campaign, it has nothing to do with Kamala Harris? Like, how did they attack that? Because there's no way that they can sit there and say that their messaging was right. It just wasn't.
Oh, okay. So maybe I take it back. Maybe you shouldn't watch it. Maybe the issue is me and that I don't get riled up easily. Because they didn't. They absolutely think that their messaging was correct.
Yeah.
They think that they think that they both strategically and tactically were correct. And they did the thing that I do find super annoying and sort of illogical, which is like, we didn't lose that bad. We did really well. Like, we moved her unfavorables up. We moved people around the economy. It was an incredibly hard thing to do. And we did really good in a bunch of things, and we didn't lose that bad.
Wow.
And this like absolutely insane thing that I keep hearing people say, which is like, everywhere we competed, our numbers went up. And it's just like, of course they did. Like, what are you talking about?
You spent $1.5 billion.
Yeah, $1.5 billion.
$1.5 billion. If what you're saying is $1.5 billion showed that we did a little bit better in the battleground states than in the rest of the country. I mean,
no. So yeah, so I mean, but I guess part of it is like, I knew it was going to be bad, and they delivered. They absolutely met my expectations of like zero accountability, zero contrition, and sort of zero willingness or introspectiveness. Like, I mean, Jenna Miley Dillon specifically multiple times was like, oh, our analytics were really close. They were better than 2020 and 2016. And Quentin,
they were better. They claimed that they were better.
Yeah. And that's what she said. Yeah, she said they were better than 2016 and
so then they knew they were going to lose the popular vote going into election day. That's what they're saying.
Maybe so. And Quentin, who was in charge of all the paid ads, like talked about the testing multiple times. And one of the messages that we received is like either A, ad testing is a scam and doesn't work, or B, they couldn't come up with an ad test that would have worked.
Yeah.
So it's sort of like,
Yeah.
it wasn't, listen,
It's a bummer. Like,
I don't think there's any reason to listen to it. Like, it's not instructive. It's not insightful. It's probably just annoying.
it's also trying to walk in their shoes, right? I think that I would probably go into an interview like that trying to do two things. One, trying to defend as much as you can all of the hard work that so many people put into the campaign, right? So staffers, people who've been toiling and working for, to your point, this wasn't just 100 days. There are people working on this campaign apparatus for over a year.
Yeah.
And so you go on there to try to defend because there's no other way to put it. I mean, I think that the response to the management of this campaign, it's getting to the point where people are going to start saying which was worse, the Hillary campaign or the Kamala campaign.
Such a bummer.
Because I think that there seemed to be a lot of protectionism, which is to say, and I think you were on some of these calls, right? The kind of outgoing staff calls, begging staff not to talk to the press, right? Wanting to sort of protect people's, I don't know, I guess egos, or protect people's legacies, or I think that we just got to get past that. I mean, you and I talked about this, which is, I believe your quote was, if you're at rock bottom, like there's actually exciting things that can happen.
I stand behind it.
Yeah, there's exciting things that can happen when you start to say honest things like, I don't know what went wrong, right? But something did. Or you start to say things like, fundamentally, we were not prepared for this ass kicking, because you can't have it both ways. You as Jen O'Malley Dillon can't say our analytics were better than they've ever been when the day before the election, you, Jen O'Malley Dillon, and David Plouffe were going on every single media channel saying we are going to win every single battleground state. So which one is it? Were you lying the day before the election? That doesn't seem like a winning strategy. If you really knew you were going to lose every battleground state, pretty convincingly, by the way, and you also knew you were going to lose the popular vote, should you not have created more urgency around your candidacy? Would you not be telling the world that we are actually losing right here? We should not be resting on our laurels.
Well, I think they were trying to do that, in fairness. I mean, they were trying to, I don't think the campaign's message was ever like, we're ahead. They very much tried to keep it positioned as she's the underdog.
They said, Plouffe said, and I love David Plouffe, but my man said, we think we're going to win every single battleground state.
Did he really?
He said that the day, not only the day before the election, he gave interviews the morning of. Y'all lost every single one. Not a fucking one.
Yeah.
So you gotta eat humble pie. You just have
some
to.
pie. Have some pie.
You gotta eat a little bit of humble pie. You gotta eat a little bit, like
Yeah,
you just you can't come in and say we did everything right. You didn't do everything right. You just didn't. You just didn't.
Well,
so
I don't think that they're saying that they did everything right. I think they are trying to advance this idea that there was no way to know that they were doing something wrong. Which
okay.
Shit, but like, which it just isn't true. I
I
showed
get
up
it.
in Philadelphia and instantly knew things were wrong.
Well, you and I both knew things were wrong. I mean, that's the other part about this too, right? Like there was
Yeah.
so much data showing that things were wrong. There was so much data, both the data that Tom Bonnier went through with us with regards to young men, the data that we were seeing with voter registration numbers among, again, the gender gap. Like a lot of this stuff was happening, and we didn't have access to internal polling. We didn't have access to, all of the millions of dollars they were spending on testing these ads that fucking sucked, by the way. Like, I just don't, you also have to take a step back and think, there's not a one ad that I can remember from this cycle that moved me that I even remember. I just don't. I know it sounds mean, but, and so, like the messaging was weak. The pushback on misinformation on the attack ads was negligible. They just pretended as if those attack ads weren't happening. And yeah, you're right. Like, it's a perfect example. Like, the sphere, like these flashy things, like they think that the flashy things are culture, right? That's not culture. Like, throwing 400,000, how much money was the sphere? The sphere was like $1 million or so, right? I don't know. It was one of those things that, created a little bit of news. I don't know. I guess it's the kind of thing where you have $1.5 billion to spend. And so you're going above and beyond, and you're doing things you otherwise wouldn't if you had all that money. But that's not culture. It's just not. And if you want to know what culture is, you should talk to people who understand what culture is. But because I just don't think that this campaign knew what it was at all. It just didn't. And we'll see. I think that the reckoning is coming. I think you're right about, there needs to be people who were called in to do this, just need to maybe sit out.
Like, it's no problem. There's so much cool stuff to do.
Yeah.
There's so much cool stuff to do. Like,
there's a lot to do.
World's full of amazing adventures,
There's so much for all of us to do. What other media while you were cooking, were there other podcasts or other things that you were reading or dissecting? I do think that the postmortem of this campaign will continue for months and months and months and months and months, if not years. I think it happened with Hillary. Like, we remember how long the animosity of the Bernie bros and the Hillary bots that continued for years. It like almost led into, the next primary. So we're not going to have a shortage of postmortems, and we're also not going to have a shortage of tell-all memoirs. We're not going to have a shortage of.
I cannot wait. Like, that is going to be delicious. I love a tell-all memoir from like a mid-level person, because they don't give a single, like, they don't care at all. And they have like the thinnest covers for who people are.
It's going to be brutal, because I think what is going to be evident from that is that it's almost like the disarray and the dysfunction of the Kamala campaign is an outcome of stuff that was dysfunctional years in the lead up to. So it's right. So I think a really good tell-all, I think, is going to have to really dig into, it's going to have to dig into the president. It's going to have to dig into his inner circle. It's going to have to dig into a lot of the choices made on him running again. And it will be great. I'm with you. I can't wait to read it. I can't wait to dig into it.
Cannot wait. It's really telling that Julie was not on that podcast.
It's very telling.
I
I
don't heard anything about like
it's
it's
very
very
telling. I think that, well, look, and I don't think anyone cares about Brad Jenkins's opinion on this stuff, but I will offer it from a very outsider perspective who knows a lot of these key players for many years. I think that what that shows me is actually, depending on how you want to look at it, I think it shows that Jen is really owning this campaign, owning running it, and owning it going down in historic flames. And I'll just leave it at that. I think that Julie not being there says a lot. I think that says a lot. And I will also say that I've known Julie Rodriguez for so many years. She's fucking incredible. And I know how hard she works at this stuff. And I can almost guarantee you, just knowing the characters involved at the senior level on the campaign staff and then also at the White House, that there were a lot of disagreements. I am sure of it. So Julie not being there, that's my take, because I don't know why you would have, I love Quentin. I don't know why you would have Quentin there and not Julie, you know?
intrigue, palace intrigue.
House intrigue indeed. But we love all those guys. I love Quentin, you know.
I don't know
Twigg,
that I
you and
know.
I knew Quentin. Quentin and I worked together very quickly on the Warnock stuff, the Warnock runoff in Georgia. He was Warnock's campaign director. That was also a campaign that was, interestingly enough, mired by a lot of noise on the outside of, different constituencies not feeling like they were being heard, and a strategy that was very paid media focused. And it brings up the larger question around paid media itself. You and I have been talking about the diminishing returns of paid media like back in 2012. You know what I mean? Like back when there's the shifting focus from television ads, which no one, even in 2012, no one under the age of 45 years old was watching TV commercials. That is, think about what that number looks like now. Now paid media also does include digital paid ads as well. But again, the diminishing returns of just paid in general across the board. Donald Trump doesn't do much paid media because he drives earned media every single fucking day. Every single fucking day. And, the excuse that Kamala didn't do more as it relates to podcasts, I think is also bullshit, because we know for a fact that folks like Theo Vaughn, like our producer Sean Boyle, heard from Theo directly. Theo invited Kamala on. Theo also had Bernie Sanders on. He had Donald Trump on, right? That happened. I also know for a fact that there were numerous spaces, I won't name names, but numerous spaces that Donald Trump went on that those people would have fallen over themselves to have Kamala Harris on, including Joe Rogan. And I think the Joe Rogan thing, again, I think it's a bit bullshit to say it was a scheduling mishap and that was the only day she could record with Joe Rogan. It's just, come on, like,
they made a calculation that the juice wasn't worth the squeeze. And
exactly.
Was the wrong
just say that. Just say.
That's the whole thing.
Yeah,
this like kind of culture of not being able to say you're wrong is so frustrating and annoying.
Yeah. Just say we didn't see the value of going on Joe Rogan. It's fine. And you could also say, maybe we should have gone on Joe Rogan. Who knows? Like at this point, when you get beat that bad, and yes, you did get beat bad. When you say, here's the other thing, the last thing I'll say, and then I'll shut up about this. You can't have it both ways.
Exactly.
You can't say we barely lost when you didn't barely lose. This would be like playing a football game and you lose by 7 touchdowns. And you're like, well, but we
it was
almost
really
got in
close.
the end zone. 6 of the 7 times. You know, like we almost did that. It's like, no, that's not how the report card is graded. The report card is graded on, it's an electoral college. Did you win the battleground state or did you not win the battleground state? Everyone knew where all the battleground states were. This is just what it is. And everyone knows if you lose by a point or you win by a point, that's the difference of whether winning or losing. No one is looking at the margin of victory. It's either you won or you lost. And you got your asses kicked. You lost every fucking battleground state. You did not put the ball in the end zone for a single fucking battleground state. Not one. And you know what? You know what? Ruben Gallego put the ball across the goal line in Arizona. Tammy Baldwin put the ball across the goal line in Wisconsin. Alyssa Slotkin put the ball across the goal line in Pennsylvania. So you also can't say it was impossible for us to figure this shit out with $1.5 billion. So
Yes, there he is.
some fucking humble pie. Sorry.
No, you're right. You're right. You're right. You're right.
I ate so much turkey. I'm like holding it all in. I'm holding it all in.
Tryptophan is not working. Are you following anything right now? Are you taking like a little media break, or are you? Because I have a question.
Yeah, the only thing I read, and I sent it to you in Boyle this morning. I read Faz Shakir was on Ezra's show. Faz is an old friend. Weirdly, I'm here in Philly to visit my brother-in-law and my sister-in-law. And Faz was my brother-in-law's college roommate at Harvard. Faz also played baseball at Harvard and was a very good baseball player. But Faz was Bernie Sanders' campaign manager. Faz is also ran Nancy Pelosi's shop. He also is at the ACLU. Faz is also at the Center for American Progress. He's one of the few people, not just because I know him through my brother-in-law, but he's someone who I've known for so many years, who's one of the smartest people at this Democratic Party shit, because he's seen it from all angles. He's seen it from running Bernie. He's seen it from sort of the neoliberal echo chamber that is Center for American Progress. He's seen it working for Nancy Pelosi and actually working for the leader and figuring out how you whip votes and how you move legislation, et cetera. And Ezra and he had a really big debate on would Bernie Sanders have won?
What did he say?
Like if there was a magic wand, and Bernie was dropped in. I know that that's not the way this works, but I think that that's sort of the thought exercise of this conversation. I think, Faz's take was like Bernie would have won. And I thought, as always, I think Ezra just kind of poked a lot of holes through that argument. Meaning Faz came at it from the perspective of Bernie has always been an economic populist. He's always viewed the lens of policy working for working class people from like the base level of it doesn't matter where he is as well. It's the same consistent message of, look, the odds are stacked against you. There are people who there's no reason why things should be this expensive. There's no reason why your child shouldn't be able to get an affordable college education. There's no reason why we can't have better paying jobs, et cetera, et cetera. And I think Ezra made the very strong case that was very much, if you were to just look at what Joe Biden did, you could not have pointed to a more economic populist Democratic president in recent perhaps in our lifetime.
Ever, yeah.
And yet he was still polling at 40%, 38%, right? And so, and then I think they just went back and forth on a lot of this stuff. I think that he also brought up a lot of the gaps in Bernie's, people tend to think that Bernie is just an economic populist and pretty conservative when it comes to a lot of issues, but Bernie has moved to the left on virtually every issue. on immigration, you know, like he's someone who wants to decriminalize the border. On environmental things like fracking, he opposes fracking. Like he's not, when we think of Bernie Sanders back in like 2016, you know, Hillary was trying to attack Bernie because of his stance on like gun rights, right? Like Bernie was one of the rare US senators who caucused with Democrats, although he's an independent, that did not get an F rating from the NRA, right? And like we remember that primary where people were, you know, Hillary people were trying to say that Bernie, you know, loves the NRA, and it's just like a whole other world if we go back to that moment. And Bernie's moved on this. And so I think what Ezra was trying to say is that there's not much daylight between Bernie Sanders of 2024 and most Democrats, including President Biden.
I would argue, but
yeah.
Okay.
And so, yeah, it was interesting. I mean, I just love the thought exercise was good. Faz is also someone who, it's actually said on the pod, is considering running for DNC chair. So,
ooh, let's get him on the pod.
we should definitely get him on the pod. And then, you know, so there's that. And then I've been paying attention to a lot of, I've not had time to like dissect a lot of longer thought pieces, but my social media feed has been very interesting with regards to the pundit class. And like, there have been a number of people who've come out and sort of gone on Fox News and gone on cable news channels just to say, fuck this campaign. This campaign sucks. And there's a lot of pushback on that from people, obviously, who've worked on the campaign. So, yeah, it's ugly. You know, I think that there's no other way to put it. I think that we're in this.
Are you following any of the stories about like all the trail of people who are like going to Mar-a-Lago to pay their respects to the Don?
A little bit. The only thing I've followed, there are a few pods that I won't name that have like Trump whisperers on. And so there's obviously a lot of palace intrigue right now with regards to the cabinet he's putting together and like the decisions, like how he got to some of these cabinet appointments, and the strategy not necessarily being lined up necessarily with, because I think a lot of times you're just assuming, oh, these are just people who are Trump cronies, or these are just Trump, you know, diehards. Marco Rubio, for instance, it seems to be consensus among the right that the major reason why Trump appointed Marco Rubio was because Lara Trump wants to run for Senate in Florida. Like, this was very much a tactical move to get Rubio out as a senator in Florida. Which again, it's the kind of thing where you're like, oh yeah, that makes sense. You know, like there's.
Well, so long as the governor does what he wants, you know.
Exactly right. I mean, it sounds like there's a lot of pressure on him to make sure that that happens. But meaning, I guess these appointments, traditionally appointments are made pretty straightforward. Who is the most qualified person to do this? And whatever the mission of that department or agency is, how are we going to be, you know, effective, historic? How are we going to make strides that no other administration has done before? And it did not surprise me when I heard that, because I do not think Donald Trump appointed Marco Rubio because he thought we're really diplomacy.
You know who I really like? That guy, Marco.
Little Marco. You know who's really someone who I want me represented to the world is my guy, Little Marco.
Glass of water, you know, just make sure he has
Little Marco. Yeah, no, it's. How about you? I think that, you know, the DNC chair stuff is heating up. I would love your thoughts, just following through on our last pod, on, you know, how and what Democratic Party, especially state Democratic Party leaders, are saying and feeling. I know I'm in Philly right now, and it's like very much a reckoning against Brady here, who's kind of like the chairman of the Pennsylvania Democratic Party. I think I'm fascinated by, like, will this be a moment where the old hands just step down? And like, honestly, like, this is the moment to pass the reins. You know, if there's ever a moment,
If ever there's a moment. Listen, I mean, I hope so. That so rarely happens, right? So like, again, what made it so remarkable that Joe Biden did that, it almost never happens that anyone voluntarily gives up power or gives up their seat. And so hopefully, but we'll see. I mean, I don't know. The names that I'm hearing are all people that we've heard of before for the most part, and people who sort of have been gone for a little while or are making a comeback. I think we should try and interview everybody. I think I should come to DC for a couple days, and we should try and do a whole little special series on the pod, because I'm really curious about what folks are interested in, who and how this is all going to unfold.
I do too. I think that the moment right now screams for like, it would be beautiful if you were to have sort of a multi-generational approach across the board, right? Like, Ohio is a perfect example, right? Where I don't want to name names, but like, well, no, Congresswoman Beatty, like, she's been there for a very long time. Like, maybe this is a great moment for her to move on. Like, there's so many elder statesmen across the Democratic Party. I think, I brought this up, speaking of, family talk last night. I brought up Chuck Schumer, and then of course my family's like, whoa, 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 whoa. Like, the Senate is so, obviously the Senate's so important right now. Like, we still do need strong leadership at the top of the Senate. But in my head, I'm like, but I don't know. I think that what ends up happening in all of these positions, right? Like, we see it time and time again. To your point, Joe Biden was one of that rare public figures that actually, he was forced to do it, but he actually did it. But people in power believe that they are the only ones that can do it. They are the only ones, and they sort of convince themselves, whether it's Dianne Feinstein, whether it's RBG, whether, just go down the list of people. They just convince themselves that they're the only person that can do this job effectively. And it's burned us time and time again as a party. And I just think it's like, now's the moment. If you are over the age of 75, like, or 70 or 65, like, just
to that. I am not opposed to there being like age gating Congress. I mean, you have to be over a certain age to run and hold office in the first place. I don't think that there's necessarily, it's not as though, you have to be old enough to be president, a member of the House or a member of the Senate. You can also just be too old. I don't think that's controversial. I think that is a slightly different issue than whether or not we're going to see a meaningful change in leadership at the kind of Democratic Party infrastructure level, right? I think also one of the realities, I think that would be far more likely to have occurred potentially. This might be counterintuitive, but I think that would have been more likely to happen in victory. I think there's so many people looking for jobs. And so many people are going to be going to the DNC, and that it's actually going to be getting the attention of people who have had long-term relationships, because you grow up with people in this industry, people that I know that I've worked with since I was 18, 19 years old. And so over the course of that 20 years, it's like there are people that you build a relationship with and that you trust and that you can rally to your cause and rally to your support. And so in a time when there's only a few shows in town anymore, it's not, we have the White House, not like we have the House majority. the DNC is going to become a massive like attention suck. And so I think it's going to be really tricky to sort of boot people when I think loyalty and like people are fighting for jobs and a certain limited number of them. It's going to be really hard.
That's a very good point. I think the one thing that I don't know if it sounds like it was touched upon a little bit on the Pod Save interview, but the point that I am really interested in the remaking of the Democratic Party. Obviously, it starts with this DNC chair race, but I think that there needs to be. I think we need to like really like blue sky, think very big about the kind of Democratic Party we want to build. And you and I talked about this with regards to Obama, right? Like that moment when, you know, Obama for America became Organizing for Action, and that tension between the existing state Democratic parties and the DNC, and all of the energy and enthusiasm that then President Obama had, and how that sort of spilled out and never really got resolved. And we're now in a different situation where, you know, losing to Donald Trump a second time, right, I think should be the rock bottom that everyone should feel. This is the thing that I am a little bit frustrated by, is I think that we are not putting the same level of accountability and blame across the progressive infrastructure. Like we're only placing the blame on the Democratic Party, right? Because more money was actually spent outside of the Democratic Party. More money was spent from super PACs, IEs, C4s, C3s. And I know like we probably shouldn't bring up C3s, but we should bring up C3s, because there are a lot of organizations that choose to be C3s for a variety of different reasons. And guess what? Donald Trump is going to now go after all of those C3s. I'm not sure if you're seeing this, but like one of the big things they want to do is essentially like take down a lot of 501c3s that they deem as already participating in political activity. And maybe that becomes the mother of invention and innovation, to make those organizations realize and take stock and say, well, wait, my little voter reg operation that I raise $1 million for in Gwinnett County, Georgia, right? And I employ 4 people, and we go out there and we do really good work. Maybe this is a really interesting time to bring those efforts into the Democratic Party.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, I think there just needs to be a rethinking of organizations merging, organizations becoming staff and resources, donors, boards going into the Democratic Party, state Democratic parties. Like this wall of these are all these organizations and groups, and this is the Democratic Party. We gotta start getting rid of that, and we have to start. The Republican Party doesn't do that. I mean, the Republican Party, it's there aren't tens of thousands of organizations. They have like 20, you know, like substantial organizations. So I think it'd be exciting to think through, like, how do you have like a really strong African American creative team in the DNC, right?
Yeah.
And that is built out from the same team of donors that's investing in Color of Change, Collective PAC, Black Voters Matter, Fair Fight. You know, those donors are giving those organizations tens of millions of dollars. Why don't we put those resources in the Democratic Party itself?
Yeah.
You know, and I know people are probably going to be like, that's a fool's errand. Fuck
Well,
the
and I think,
Democratic Party.
well, yeah, I think that it's more that it's
Yeah.
less about like, like I have so many friends that are just like Democrats are Carrie, Democrats suck. Like you guys, you guys are the
No.
worst. And so, I mean, like we are many a trust exercise away from getting people to be willing to fold their outside organization into the Democratic Party. But I don't disagree that I think that the need for kind of blue sky visioning of what the Democratic Party can and should be and how it changes. That's another thing that sort of, and again, I don't want to harp on this pod save episode, but another thing that was so remarkable, and you've heard people make fun of, these guys for it already. It's like they ran an amazing campaign for 2016 and they talked about it too. Like the way they were even talking about the campaign, you're just sort of like, what year is this, you guys? Like, what year are you in that this is the nature of the conversation? So it's an interesting sort of like that, and that to me like if that carries over into the DNC and we don't take this moment to like fundamentally reorganize and rethink and innovate, we're gonna have a rough go of it, man.
One idea I had, actually, this sounds so corny, but it's true. I've been having, I think it's because I'm not drinking as much, so I'm sleeping more vividly. And so I've been having these dreams, but I had this like
Dreaming more vividly.
Dreaming more vividly. Sorry, not sleeping more vividly. That's weird. But I had this dream where one of the jobs I did at the White House was we had this thing called Common Purpose Project, which was this coalition of over like 100 different organizations that came together every Tuesday night at the Capitol Hilton. White House senior staff were there. We had working groups across issue areas. But the whole point of this collective was that all of these organizations were, one, getting pretty clear direction from the White House on like what Obama and what the White House political team, and also in the lead up to the re-election, like what everyone was focused on, right? And there wasn't like a pushing groups into what we wanted them to say. It was more of a, you're not going to be surprised by anything that's coming out of this White House because you're going to know it a month before it happens. And so everyone is just always on the same page, And there's also a very open line of communication from what organizations and different special interests were caring about and doing as well. So there was just, it was really an exciting moment. This White House doesn't do that anymore. They don't have those meetings. The other thing about that moment too is that, the first iteration of Common Purpose Project, Rahm Emanuel ran, and it was very sort of keep everyone in line. Because it was, as you guys can remember, it was when we had a supermajority. We were trying to get Obamacare passed. We were trying to get a stimulus and a Recovery Act passed. And the White House at the time, I was not there, we're trying to beat back any efforts to derail those pieces of legislation from being too left, right? Because there was a push for single payer, there's a push for a more progressive healthcare bill. And while we had a majority, we had some pretty fucking weak-willed Democrats that called themselves blue dogs that were ostensibly Republicans. And so it was really hard to sort of keep the ranks, keep everyone in line. And a lot of those meetings were contentious. A lot of those meetings were Rahm and Messina and these guys like yelling at these groups to fucking shut up and listen. And we got to get this shit done, right? Like it was tough love between these groups. And, we can go back in time and we can, however we want to say whether the ACA was successful. I personally think it was immensely successful. There were a lot of trade-offs, obviously, with putting all of our eggs in the ACA basket with regards to doing things on climate, doing things on immigration. We just didn't have the ability to do because we put all of our political chips on the table for healthcare. I think some version of common purpose needs to be reconstituted in this town.
Yeah,
I
that's a good
really
idea.
do. I think that because one of the things that common purpose did do, you spoke to this earlier, Twig, which was like right now we're like a leaderless party right now. You know, at that moment it was very clear who led the party, and it was Barack Obama. You know,
Yeah.
and in that moment, the Democratic Party was humming. It was really humming. Now,
Yeah.
could we have done a lot more for the Democratic Party? Of course. But at the very least, we were all on the same page. We all knew how to win elections. We all knew what we had to do to win those elections. And we won elections. We won those elections, right? And I felt like the messaging piece, like so much of our conversation now seems to be about messaging. Like, I can't remember in the Obama years, no one was ever coming to us and being like, your guys' message is bad. Do you agree or do you disagree?
They were so seldomly bad.
It was seldomly bad. Like people just knew.
That
People
said,
knew people knew where we were at all times, and no one was questioning, you know?
I will say that though his messages were infrequently bad, they were almost never the wrong message. Yet we did just fail to message a lot.
True.
We failed to message around a bunch of different things, and then we'd scurry to then message, and the message was usually right because I think he always had good instincts, and the people around him had good instincts for messaging. But even by Barack Obama's own admission, I think like one of his first post-presidency interviews was the David Letterman sit down. My next guest needs no introduction or whatever it is, and Letterman asked Obama what one of his regrets was. And he was like, I think, and he would say something he said something to the effect of, like, I would often forget to tell the story. Like I would forget to storytell. And storytelling has brought me into office. And occasionally we would forget that we had to tell people a story and tell them why we were doing what we were doing and how we were going to do it. And you remember there would be all these, like, we would scramble and scurry to get like real people for events or for the State of the Union or for whatever. And Deborah, whose son, little Timmy, has asthma, and that's what he needs the ACA and whatever the hell. And so often, and like the thing that I think I find so infuriating about this moment is that over and over again, we're trying to learn the same mistakes. And that to me is just absolutely crazy making.
Great point.
The fact that we have to remember, like, tell Joe Biden to tell the story of the infrastructure bill. Like, what planet are we on? What are we doing? The fact that we had to tell the campaign that you might have a base problem with Black men, particularly. Like I watched in 2004 when John Kerry picked Black people up in Cleveland and all around Columbus or all around Ohio, drove them to the polls, never once asked them for their vote. And they voted for George Bush because gay marriage was on the ballot. Like it's crazy to me that over and over and over again, the Democrats insist on reinventing the wheel. They insist on making the same mistakes, and they're so preventable. And so I think that I mean, I don't know, this is my version of the rant, but it's just sort of to your point. I think that common purpose does need to be rebuilt because guess what? Talking to the people who are working in common purpose is how you win things that require 100 million people to do one thing, which is vote for your candidate all in the same time. And it's like, why do we have to, like, the fact that we even need to reconstitute some of these things and they haven't been humming is wild to me. But okay, great, let's do it. Let's get there. And then how do we take some of the lessons that we've learned and implement them consistently and in a way that is organized and thoughtful and long lasting into places like the DNC, where all of this institutional knowledge and all this lesson learning should be housed so that it can be codified and so that it can get into like the bones and the makeup and the conventional wisdom of the party in a way that it doesn't seem like it is.
It's really, yes, yes to all of that. And I'm reminded, I think that I was thinking of this because you were saying, you were like distilling my like rant last week in just that we have to do everything at once, right? Like we have to be able to have an overall vision and a message that everyone can be a part of. And that was something that was so unique and brilliant about Common Purpose Project, especially under the direction John Carson, who took the helm when I came to the White House. And it didn't matter. It was an interesting moment when, you know, the president would issue an EO, or the president would issue, you know, a new legislative proposal. Like the American Jobs Act was this kind of like political legislative proposal. We knew it wasn't going to pass, but it was the kind of thing that we wanted to run on, right? So we wanted all of the groups to be on the same page, message wise, right? Like that, it was a tool, like we were using legislation for messaging purposes. And it was like chef's kiss, like which is crazy to think about because Biden actually got legislation passed and he couldn't message on it. Really, it's like we were making up shit just so that we can talk about it. And what was so cool about Common Purpose was we would pick weeks. We'd be like, all right, this month we're going to talk about how we need to rebuild public schools. These are the public schools all across the country that need to be reinvested. We need to rebuild. We have to put more public school teachers back to work. It didn't matter whether you were an ed reform or a public teacher union or a industrial union or an environmental group.
Yeah.
We didn't care what issue you were, what constituency you were, what your primary issue was. It did not matter to us because education, public education, affects everyone.
Yeah.
It affects everyone. So we were getting statements of support, social media, events from climate groups talking about public education. And it was not out of the question for us to direct these organizations and fire them up to say, we know this isn't your primary issue. We know, but you know what? We're going to talk about public education right now because we are seeing that Mitt Romney fucking sucks on this issue. And this is an important issue for Democrats. And so we're going to own public education.
Well, and here's the thing. It works. It works. I'm right now in Columbus, Ohio, and out my back window is I think the second largest infrastructure infrastructure project in the country right now. It's merged 71 and 270, these two massive interstate highways that we've been talking about merging together for 20 years in Ohio. Biden actually every time Biden's actually paying for it through the infrastructure bill. And it's like every time I leave the house and see this massive project and I don't see paid for by Joe Biden, like,
I know.
I am infuriated. It's like, it should be like these dudes building this incredible thing, these incredible dudes, they should be in merch. Like, why am I not seeing them in Biden merch? And then my second, so like you would have no idea. And guess when it's going to be ready? This last year of Trump's term, right?
Yes.
And he's going to come here and he's going to waddle around and he's going to cut a ribbon or whatever. And it's going to be like Trump's bridge. It's going to be so annoying. And
waddle, by the way, waddle is the best verb for that. That visual, the waddle. Just this. It's gonna waddle around, cut this ribbon.
And the thing about everything you just said that also I'm getting retroactively really annoyed by this damn podcast episode.
I love how we started where you're like, it wasn't that bad. By the end, you're like, fuck this podcast.
I'm incensed. I don't do a great job of like being hypercritical of people in the moment. Ask any ex-boyfriend I've ever had, but then I would like circle back. Like, you give me 2 weeks. Wait a second. That doesn't make any sense. Anyway, so But the thing that I'm circling back to that I'm now infuriated by is, again, this entire framework of, they were like, we had 107 days to talk about the economy, to talk about this,
Yes.
to talk about border and immigration. It's like, y'all should have been messaging that for months and months and months and months and
Yes.
months. Kamala
Yes.
Harris should have swanned in. If she didn't disagree with this administration, she was a part of it, she should have swanned in on a messaging framework that y'all had had in place for an entire year. And it's like, again, the fact that there just wasn't this really foundational and fundamental and basic infrastructure built over the course of the year preceding her becoming the nominee is such a massive failure and such a massive problem and kind of inexcusable. End of rant.
No, it's the right rant. And I think that now, I think for our next pod, because I feel like I think we've done a really good job. I also think we've been very fair, because I also have been seeing a lot of, just like burn it all down, all the Democrats, they all suck. And you and I have not done that. In fact, I think we've probably gone above and beyond trying to defend a lot of really great wins the Democratic Party had this last cycle, right? But I am getting excited by this idea of, how do we reimagine what it means to be a Democrat?
Yeah.
And I know you were saying, like, your friends like, fuck Democrats. And I think that is the feeling right now. I will admit, right? Like, Bernie put out that very provocative statement the day after the election, like, very provocative, in the words of, in the words of Will Ferrell, and gets the people going, very provocative. But it was interesting because the response that I saw from people that I admire, people who kind of straddle the line between advocacy and art and creative, it immediately, the assumption was immediately, let's start a new party.
Yeah.
Like that was the exciting thing, right? Like this idea of like, finally, like, fuck Democrats, finally, like, let's build something new.
Yeah.
And
it's like, sure, baby, but then you better get ranked choice voting.
no, I know. And like,
so many steps.
By the way, I'm not, if that is actually ultimately what Bernie starts to talk about, I'm so very curious where he goes with, he said that they're doing all of this planning or whatever. I'm curious what he comes up with. I don't think that that's what he's going to do. I think we've forgotten that Bernie has become so integral and essential to this Biden administration. Bernie worked very closely with Joe Biden. Bernie was out there doing rallies with Joe Biden. It's one of the things that Faz actually, the one provocative thing I think he was saying, which was true, was that Bernie Sanders and Joe Biden fucking loved each other and did a lot of shit together. Kamala Harris did not ask Bernie Sanders to do one event. One. Just did not do it. Bernie Sanders' team offered it, and they did not want Bernie anywhere near Kamala Harris. And I think that was a huge mistake. Huge mistake. And if we think about the number of surrogates they had out there,
I mean,
he
was in Pennsylvania, not with her, but he was in Pennsylvania doing stuff for her.
But he was never on stage with her.
Yeah.
Not one time.
Yeah.
Faz mentioned that before Bernie dropped out, Bernie and Biden did this Union Hall event, like not long before Biden dropped out. And then he dropped out, and it was radio silence. Bernie did not hear from the Commonwealth. So yeah, it's tricky. So like the question becomes, for me, I think, I don't see Bernie saying, let's start a new party. I think Bernie sees the writing on the wall, particularly with AOC, who continues to impress me almost every day. I mean, I just want to say, like, I think that there is a world where there's no reason, like the Democratic Party leadership, at least from a communication standpoint, is there for the taking. And I think that Bernie, AOC, and some of the others, Jasmine, you mentioned Jasmine Crockett, I think that there is there is like a sort of new style Avengers that's fucking ready to go. And
Oh yeah. I mean, if
you
you
know,
have if you got Twitter fingers and like you're quick, like you should be able to come hijack this no problemo. I just
like,
mean
let's
like all
go.
of I mean just mean to like all of our friends who are Democrat skeptic and who want to start a new party, like so at least so many of my friends, I won't speak for your
Yeah.
friends, but so many of my friends that are that way. It's like, listen, I don't disagree with you, but the part of me that is incredibly practical is also
Yeah.
like you're 5 to 6 cycles away from that being a case. That's assuming that you are able to like implement massive election reforms, like ranked
Yes.
choice voting and all these other things that you would actually need that would allow a third party or a fourth party to actually proliferate. Like
Yeah.
all for people who want to build a new system, want to burn the existing system down, like, I'll help, babe, but you got to learn what exactly like exists first
Yes. Yes.
before you actually start going out willy-nilly and then like convincing people to give you a bunch of money that siphons cash from other places and takes away talent and thinking and innovating that is ultimately going to ladder up to nothing. It's
Yes.
sort of, I've seen the number of really smart, creative, artistic people I know who are like, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to build a thing that's going to radically change the world in 2 years. I'm like, okay, like, go get him, babe. Like, I have a friend of mine who's like this world famous artist. It's like this incredible artist, and he came up with this like civic engagement idea. And I have no memory of this, but apparently I just like laughed in his face. And we're just like, that's
That sounds
not
like a Carrie Twig move. I like this.
right. And I was like,
Honestly.
that's not gonna work, but like do what you want. And he was apparently quite offended, and I didn't even notice.
Oh,
And then years later, he was like, okay, so you might have been right. And I was like, see, like this stuff is
yeah.
a lot harder. It is harder and takes more time and requires so much more than people think. It's like
Yes.
the Dunning-Kruger effect is so alive in politics. And the Dunning-Kruger, it's like that thing where we think we're so much expert and we think we're so much better at things than we actually are, and that we're so much smarter than we are. It's like 60% of American men think they could land a plane, and it's like in an emergency. And it's like the odds are like 2% of y'all can do that, right? Like it's just not like, God bless American optimism. And men are the most just optimistic creatures on the face of the earth, truly. But it's just like not true, right? And so many people want to reform things and want to break things and rebuild them, but they don't have any idea what they're talking about. And they don't have
Yeah.
any expertise, and they have no ability to do this well. And it's like, don't be Donald Trump. Like, what are you
Yeah.
doing? And like, let's not. And so I don't know, this is a rant about how I'm really sympathetic to the ways that we need to change and their critiques, that I have my own critiques about the Democrats, obviously. And yet it's like, I mean, I'll help you rebuild it, but it's like, it's going to take a minute, babe. And so in the meantime, let's also think about where we're at, because there's people in imminent danger, you know?
Yes. That ding, ding, ding. I was just going to say that, right? Which is, we got to walk and chew gum at the same time. Like they're going to be throwing all of this shit at us, and we're going to have to be able to organize communities, push back, defend communities, vulnerable communities, build new coalitions, build new communities, build new education and content and creative that you and I talked about to explain what's happening. I mean, there will be, speaking of my time here in Philadelphia, I'm hanging out with 2 doctors, one of whom is an infectious disease specialist who does research from grants from the NIH. And it's, I mean, the dismantling of our government is actually going to be an opportunity for there to be an education of our government. And but the other part on the Democratic Party side is, for people who have been throwing stones since the Bernie debacle, because I think a lot of it started then, right? I think that people still have scar tissue and battle wounds from feeling as if, and it happened twice, to be honest, because I was looking at this beautiful chart, right before the Democratic Party coalesced behind Joe Biden. Bernie Sanders was set to win that primary. I mean, he had more individual donors across the country than all of the other candidates combined, right? And the Democratic Party made
2020 or 20?
Yeah, 2020. Democratic Party made a very calculated decision that, and it was also personal decisions as well. Folks like Pete and others sort of reading the writing on the wall that there's no way that they're going to win. And everyone sort of lined up behind our guy, Joe Biden, right? But if that campaign were to have continued, the trajectory of that campaign were to have continued the way it was, Bernie Sanders was going to win. Bernie Sanders had so much money. He had so much money in the bank. He had so many, there was so much momentum behind him. He would have won. And the Democratic Party, that's the last thing the Democratic Party wanted, right? And it's this interesting thing that you described it too, which is, it's like, we've almost sort of been like holding back the gates. It's like this working class populism, or this working class departure from the Democratic Party that we're seeing in all these exit polls and all this polling. This was already happening, and we kept deluding ourselves that Bernie Sanders was not the answer. Bernie Sanders was not the answer in 2016. Bernie Sanders was not the answer in 2020. And he's just too damn old right now to be the answer in 2024. You know what I mean? So
I would push back on this. I would pull an Ezra Klein and like push back on this a little bit on 2020, because there's not much that Joe Biden gets you, or there's not much that Bernie Sanders gets you that Joe Biden doesn't, aside from Black people. Ding, 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 ding. So like, I actually don't buy that Bernie Sanders would have won the primary. I'm open. I could be convinced. But
I think he would have won if all of those candidates had not dropped out in that moment, and they all put all of their weight behind Joe Biden. And if it were just like, not, because that was a bit of a manufactured thing, right? Like that was the Democratic Party elders coming together and saying, look, guys, let's just read the writing on the wall. What's going to happen here if this campaign continues?
I don't disagree that the Democratic Party has not been interested in Bernie Sanders. I've said as much, that they've gone to lengths to keep him excluded. But I also don't know, I wouldn't ascribe that much nefariousness and organization to this particular band of yahoos. Like, we're also not good at that.
I think it was just tactical. I think it was just like look,
we are not that good at organizing like that. We're just not. We just aren't. And so like, I'm always very skeptical about like anything that has hints of conspiracy theory as it relates to like Democratic operatives, because like, that's not our strength. There are other things that we can do that we're good at, but I don't think that that's necessarily one of them. But I also think that the fact that the Democratic that we moved South Carolina up, that Joe Biden had all the endorsements of major Black people, all of them, and Bernie Sanders has never had a strong relationship or meaningful support from Black voters ever at any point in his entire meteoric rise in the last decade. He just has never had a good racial lens. That's why I didn't like Bernie Sanders. It's like, there's nothing that Joe Biden doesn't have that Bernie does. Like, there's nothing that Bernie Sanders has that you don't get with Joe Biden, plus a meaningful contribution to being able to talk about race. And it's like, I don't necessarily, I'm happy to review the tape, but I'm not convinced that that's true.
We'll agree to disagree. What we will agree on, though, we gotta
land this plane, babe. We've been talking for like 2 hours.
What we will agree on, though, is that what we can't do, which we won't do, is not listen to, because I still believe there is a very strong Bernie Sanders wing. It may not even be of the Democratic Party. I just think that that's where most people actually, our base actually is, like I
don't disagree.
If you go across, just look at all the numbers, like how did we lose? We lost with our base. How did we
Yeah.
lose? We lost in parts of the country where we are strong Democratic. There are strong Democratic strongholds in urban areas, you know, like, so anyway,
Yeah.
all this to say,
Great. And I don't
it's going to be exciting.
like, there should have always been a really prominent role for Bernie Sanders in the party. And that's been our, like, since 2016. And it has
Agreed.
been a massive, massive mistake that we have not, that there hasn't been. I don't know that that role necessarily needed to be president, but I do think that, like, that dude, the fact that we've so underutilized him and, like, whiffed at T-ball with him, like, he was
Yeah.
so good, you know?
Yes, agreed. Agreed.
And
Last thing I'll say, because I know, because yeah, speaking of Bernie, like, you guys shot all this amazing footage of Bernie during this last cycle, but the people who are, you know, especially as it relates to Palestine right now, which is still such a mess. There's a ceasefire right now in Lebanon with Hezbollah, which is great news, but you know, just continued support of this never-ending, just fucking unfathomable war. And the anger continues, and the anger from, again, these are just friends and people that I know in my life, is now so pointed at the Democratic Party. And this is a time where it's sort of what I was saying before, where it's like, if you are an interested person in leadership for the Democratic Party, now's your time. But also,
get in there, babe.
Get in there. But also simultaneously, if you are angry at the Democratic Party, now is actually a time to get involved in the Democratic Party.
Yeah.
Right?
Totally.
Like, this is the moment. This is like, let this moment radicalize you, and let this moment, like, it's not going to change. Like, you can keep throwing stones at it and saying that it's bullshit, but if you actually want this entity to be better, like, we need your help. We need you to get involved, you know?
100%.
Anyway, this was, how long did we go? I got to go see Wicked, by the way.
I was late. I saw it this morning.
Oh, was it good?
Took my grandma. It is really good. It is long.
It's long, I know. I gotta go.
And I'd never seen the Broadway play. I never read the book, so I wasn't really entirely sure what I was getting myself into. I mean, but it's such a feat. It's spectacular, and they do such a good job. Both Cynthia and Bowen Yang and
I can't wait.
Ariana Grande, like, everyone's so good.
So good.
Yeah.
Twig, when am I seeing you next? Pretty soon, I think, right?
Soon.
You're gonna be back?
Coming to DC for honors. So I'm coming in, I'll be there Friday night.
Great.
And Tuesday. So we should block some time off and bang a couple episodes out. Get some of these candidates on the pod.
Let's do it. I actually have a personal friend who texted me. I will not say who it is, and said that they're running. They're about to run, and he wants to come on the pod. So I've not even told you this.
First of all, you have not told me this. Text me.
He may even announce on the pod. Let's go.
Let's go. Let's go. All right, Friday. We can record Friday night or Monday or Tuesday.
Cool. All right, Twig. Miss you, bro. Happy Thanksgiving.
Give my love to the fam.
Will do. Bye. How do I do this?